Hi, this is Andrew Danielson. Today I'm going to present on my topic of the decline of general aviation. This is for Southern Illinois University Mount SAC Extended Campus for Irene's 401 online class. Okay, let's get started here. Okay, introduction. In the early part of the 1970s, basically general aviation was thriving. During the time of this, there was no deregulation, and airfare was still extremely expensive. And at this time in history, I mean, basically you had, all the World War II era pilots and stuff were established, and they could afford to pick up a private plane, and they could affordably fly them and their family across country. So this is where general aviation kind of started, was post World War II and post Korean War conflict. So basically, you can see here in my slides. You have the happy families with their Cessna, and they're getting ready to go on their weekend trip wherever they're going. Okay, we're gonna move on to the next slide here. Basically living the dream, and back in the day, there was plenty of people out there flying. You could take your intro flight for $5 in the Cessna 150, $5 back then. Yeah, that was still quite a bit. That was probably the equivalent to about $50 or $60 today. So everyone could afford the dream. So 1970s, they brought it brought a tremendous amount of growth in the industry because this was basically in the late 60s. You had this tremendous boom time. Everything was good. Unfortunately, at the time, you also had a turbulent time in this time of the period with the Vietnam War and the counterculture movement. But in the general aviation world, things were moving along because airfare was still expensive, and the average man could actually afford a plane like this. It's almost the equivalent of someone buying like a fully loaded pickup truck today, without such strenuous regulations that we do today. But we'll cover that more later on in the presentation. So, talking about the late 70s, basically you had OPEC was caused an oil embargo in the Suez Canal, so that caused a lot of kind of chaos economically in the states. So basically, you had post-Vietnam, you had high inflation, you had high oil costs, and with the high oil costs, basically it caused kind of a slowdown in the economy, and also some of the defects in the general aviation aircraft were catching up. There was a lot of crashes, a lot of accidents. There was kind of a lot of fly-by-night instructors, and people were basically treating these like a recreational craft without the proper training. So this was one of the big things that caused general aviation to kind of die off, was the liability suits that and wrongful death suits that caused a lot of Piper, Cessna, Beechcraft to basically file for bankruptcy and from these lawsuits. So moving on. Also, the decline of pilots. The GI Bill had a major effect on the number of pilots. Post-Vietnam increase in the 1970s, and then you had the World War II pilots. And once everyone kind of that 5 or 6 year span after Vietnam up until the early 80s, pretty much most of the GIs used up their bills and stuff for flying. And towards the end of the 80s, the GI Bill changed, and we're in the Reagan era where they were starting to cut things back and roll things back because of things happening in the Cold War. Also, one of the things that compared to the GI Bill in the past was our new post 9/11 GI Bill doesn't cover the same thing as the former Montgomery GI Bill or the former Vietnam era bill. Basically, the private pilot must be attained before you apply for benefits. So moving on to the next slide. As you can see, where I was talking about earlier, you had the early 60s right here, and up until about the late 70s is when everything was basically peaked, and then up until now, where we have nearly about the same as when it first started out. When we first the civilian markets, civilian aircraft actually started to enter the market. So really, so basically, what we're trying to portray here is, there's a lot of people who also start the process, and right now we're seeing that the highest cost is the dropout rate of student pilots right now is about 80% for 8 out of 10 kids who start their flight training. Only 2 of them are going to finish. Also, the average pilot is much older than he was back in the day. The average student pilot is 33, and the average private pilot is 48. One of the figures that I came across also is that the average airplane owner is well in his 50s or 60s, more established, and the average income from an aircraft owner is about $150,000 a year. Now that's in the upper echelon of the middle class, and most people can't exactly afford that aircraft. And from figures that I've seen, the average owner monthly cost of owning an aircraft with flying and hangar costs, insurance is all about $1,000 a month. So most of us, that $1,000 is rent, car payment, and all that, and we just don't have that disposable income like we used to in the 60s to afford a luxury item like an aircraft. Also, the part of this pilot shortage is, it takes 60 to 80 hours opposed to the minimum 40 that the FAA passes. So now you have an extra cost, and it adds up to $10,000, and it's just hard for people to continue on with flight training. With the decline in pilots, you have, the airports aren't as lucrative for the local coffers and the city council, so they have other uses for the land. The land is actually more valuable than what's built on top of it. So talking about local closure, we have Rialto Airport, which was closed in September 18, 2014. The airport was officially closed. So from pressure from developers, this actually became a warehouse and distribution center. It actually created a lot of jobs for the community. So on the plus side, it's bringing in income for the city, for schools, and as in the airport, all they could really bring in was the cost for aviation fuel, maintenance, and just small incidental costs. Now, playing devil's advocate, we could see that a large commercial facility like this would be more beneficial for the community, but at the same time, we also lose a piece of history in the making while to obtain the status quo of progress for a city. Now, the next one is Santa Monica. It's still open, but it's already been slated for closure. The local residents are tired of the jets and the noise and everything, and they want to turn it into open space like a park, and it's still undergoing litigation currently. One of the most notable ones from years past in Orange County was the Meadowlark Airport. It was located in Huntington Beach, California, and converted into a residential commercial complex. As you can see, what's left of it is a golf course and a subdivision in Orange County, about 2 miles east of the beach in Huntington Beach. So this is what is left of the airport. It's been bulldozed and turned into condominiums. So with the overall number of pilots down, you also have everything. You lose your airports, and you lose the aircraft. Now, Piper, this is a big thing, is the longevity of the average general aviation aircraft is about 40 to 50 years old. The CFO put it, another factor in causing the decline was over success of building a long-lasting products. Our airplanes are well designed and well built, often remaining in service 30 years or longer. Now the average GA aircraft is 4 years old, and in 1965, Piper produced 150 aircraft. That was at the start of that high incline of people wanting to learn how to fly. And in 2015, only 10 aircraft were produced. So with that in mind, I mean, the high cost of liability and inflation, adjusting for that, I mean, it's still an expensive item to purchase. So a cost of a new aircraft is around close to $500,000 a new home. A Piper Cherokee on the used market can fetch for $20,000 to $45,000. I mean, that's more in reach for most of us, but with the maintenance of an older 40-year-old aircraft like an old car and stuff, it becomes a money pit for some people. As the old saying goes, there are two best days in the owner's life of an aircraft: the day the day he buys it, and the day he sells it. So, with that in mind, we're trying. The best thing we can do for saving generation is to reach out to people who are interested, start flying clubs, spread out the costs among many members, almost like a timeshare type of venture, and create a community that fosters pilots and gives good advice and lowers the cost of flight training. Also, pilots need to reach out to the youth, like Young Eagles, and get them in the air and stuff, and keep that in the back of the mind when they're young, so they have goals and everyone can continue the tradition of flying. So, like I said before, Young Eagles, that's a great, Harrison Ford flew his millionth Young Eagles, I believe, last year. And the biggest thing is keeping the airport open and allowing people to come in and see that it's not just something in the air inconvenience, that it's a small community, and this is how flying happens. And the biggest thing is lowering the cost. Banks should get tax incentives for funding aviation, whatever that may be. Also, we need to change some of the regulations and how stringent some of the certifying of aircraft is, and make it cheaper for people to insure their aircraft, and make it easier for people to become pilots. And that is my presentation. Thank you for watching.